Hey adventurers, Joe Bassett for Valiant Outfitters here with another Wilderness Wednesday. A few days ago, a friend of mine texted me and he said, hey, I just bought a new hammock, but there was no knot attaching it to the carabiner. What knot do I use? How do I tie it off? Well, it's pretty easy. You just use that lark's head knot that I've demonstrated. To do the lark's head, you start with a loop and bend it over on itself, creating two loops like bunny ears. Flip those back in on themselves, and then you take your carabiner and you feed those two loops through and pull it taut. So there's that lark's head, and that's just for attaching it to the carabiner. Pretty simple. But what if this happens? Your cordage comes completely out from the hammock. Well, pretty easy fix if you have complete cordage. Just make sure that your cordage is as long as the hammock tube is, this little fabric that loops over it, because we're going to fish it through there. Before we do that, what we want to start with is an overhand loop, again, which I've demonstrated, and it's one of my 3 favorite knots. This time, though, we're going to put it at the very end so we make a giant loop. To make that, I'm going to wrap the ends around my fingers, creating a double loop there, and then fish those working ends through the loop and pull it tight. Now make sure that you have a little bit of a tail here because you want to have a little bit of a give, but not too much. And there I've made a giant loop. This is the part that's a little bit of a pain in the neck. We're going to take this loop and fish it through that tube that's at the end of the fabric of our hammock. Now, if you have a metal tube, a little bit of conduit, you can push that in there, fish this through, makes it much easier. But of course, if this happens to you, you're out adventuring, you're out on a hike, backpacking in the backcountry, you're probably not carrying any metal tubing with you. So we'll take that loop end, and I'm going to start to fish it in, and I'll fish it as far as I can. And I'm going to take it all the way to that overhand that I used to make my overhand loop. Take it all the way down to this section. And hold it there, and just continue to push it in. Now, if that knot is big enough, it won't slip in to that tube on your fabric. If it is small enough to sneak in there, just back it off a little bit, put a toggle through here, and it'll hold it just fine for you so it doesn't sneak in and you have to redo it. I found it easiest to go to the end of that loop and cinch a bunch of it in there and then slide it down to the knot. The cordage that came with your hammock, if you get to reuse it, is probably stiff enough to hold. And you see, I've come all the way through and I'm going to cinch that down tight. Then, I'm going to pull back just a little bit so that I have this opening here, and I'm going to fish that loop back in through there and pull it as tight as I can. I might need to cinch that material around a little bit. But there we go, I fed that in through that loop. Then, down here, near that end, where the fabric is, I'm going to do another overhand and feed that back through. And I'm going to do that one more time to create a sort of stopper knot a little way up. I want to have maybe about 2 or 3 fingers before I get to that stopper knot, which is just another overhand. Wrap that around, overhand in, cinch that down. I dress these up so that the knots are as flat as possible, so they don't overlap there. This is where the lark's head is going to come into play. I can take that loop, bring it back on itself, so that I make those 2 little rabbit ears. Again, I'm going to take that, wrap it down, and that makes those 2 rabbit ears. I have my carabiner in through one of them, and then the other. Pull it down. Tighten my carabiner. And my hammock overnight has been rescued. But what if, alas, my cordage has broken and now my one continuous piece is two pieces and even of unequal length? All is not lost. We can use the same knots and apply a similar idea to repair that hammock so we can save our overnight in it. We're going to do that overhand in one end and pull it tight just like we did before. But of course, this hasn't made a loop. It's just made two pigtails here for me. This is what I'm going to take to feed through my hammock. Take the longer end and loop that back on itself so they're more or less an equal length. That loop and that end that I have, that's what I'm going to feed through the material, the fabric on my hammock. This is going to be a bit more difficult than it was with just the loop because I have that bare end that might catch on some of the seams as I go through my hammock. Now, because I have these two unequal lengths and I need to connect them, square knot is what you use to connect the ends of two pieces of rope. Now, this is only one piece of rope, but for our purposes here, because we've looped it around, we're going to use that square knot. Remember, with a square knot, whichever side we start with to go over top, the opposite side finishes over top. In this case, I'm going right to left, so right over left, wrap it around. Now left over right, wrap it around, and pull it tight to get that square knot. Give yourself some extra room here on the ends. Leave some tails here so that as it tightens down on itself and cinches down on itself, it tightens and those don't slip through. If I had enough cordage, I might even do an overhand knot on each of these as a stopper knot, but I don't have enough for that. So now I can take that loop that I've created, and this is going to be pretty small, but I'm going to make that lark's head by flipping that down over, folding them in on themselves, two rabbit ears, fold them in, take my carabiner, and on there, and pull it tight. Now remember that it's good to remember that knots are not as strong as the cordage itself, but the knots we've used here support each other or cinch down on themselves to help tighten. So then we put our weight into that hammock, it's going to tighten the knots even more. However, after suspending my hammock, I still would check those knots. I'd put a little bit of weight in, get out, inspect these knots. But that should support you for at least a few nights until you get back out of the woods and you can do a proper repair. If you found this helpful, if this gets you out of a jam, if you enjoyed this video, please click that like button. That really helps us with our subscription and helps drive up our ratings on YouTube. Also, subscribe, hit the notification button so you see every time I come out with a new Wilderness Wednesday. This is Joe Bassett for Valiant Outfitters. We'll see you out in the woods this weekend.